Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's a few things that we have to get some ground rules. Who's here from 13? From 10? You're hiding. And who's here from 3? Okay, so we'll go 13, 10, 3 this time, and last time we did 3, 10, 13, okay? You'll be responsible for the questions, so cameramen, no additional questions. Have the reporter ask the questions, okay? That way we keep this running smooth. A couple of things I do have to lay out. First of all, what I'm about to give you is certain facts that we know it as of this time. Remember, as we get deeper into any investigation, things can change. This is the fact pattern that we know at this time. And a lot of the fact pattern I'm just going to go over very briefly, because I think as I come to the end of why we're here, what the officers did to save a number of lives, I think you're going to appreciate the way that we're going to finish on our press conference, okay? We do know that at 23:39 hours on the 1st of May, we received a phone call, E911 received a phone call of shots being fired at a certain apartment. We did have a laser pointer, but the laser pointer is not going to work on this TV, so I'm going to have to kind of go back and forth and show us where the apartment is. This is the apartment in question. We know that there were shots fired at that location. Officers immediately arrived. They were there within 2 minutes, where they were able to locate, and I will not give out specific names. You know what they are. I will just say the suspect's wife and a baby, as well as an individual who was wounded during the shots fired call. They were able to speak with them, and along that bottom sidewalk is where they located everyone, and they were able then to walk the individuals to a safe area. While they were doing that, subject exited the apartment, and some additional shots were fired. Additional officers arriving at the scene were able to begin to set up a perimeter, and the way we do that is they started in the front parking lot. Now remember, this parking lot was filled with vehicles. What you see here is just a Google Earth image. That parking lot was filled with vehicles. The individual exited his apartment on 2 occasions and exchanged gunfire with the officers. We had one officer who was in the middle of the parking lot, right about here, with a couple of vehicles to either side of him. Basically, that officer could not move as he was being pinned down by gunfire. As other officers arrived, they took up a position in Rio. Could we get where we could see the wood line on this? They took up a position behind the apartment as well as this wooded area in here. Officers then set up a tight perimeter. The object and the intention was to try and get the individual to surrender. Object and the intention was not to allow the individual to exit that perimeter, because then we would have had an armed individual in the neighborhood. Numerous shots were fired at the officers during about the next 20 minutes. Officers did return fire. At one particular time, subject exited through a window, first floor window. Again, you could see the apartment. He then turned right and went to that first clump of trees. There he was confronted by 2 police officers. Subject had a weapon in his hand. The 2 police officers ordered him to drop his weapon and to get down on the ground. Instead, he turned left and ran in front of the trees in this location. The officers took an angle. They cut the individual off from escaping from the area. Individual had a weapon in his hand. They ordered him to drop the weapon and get down on the ground. He did, in fact, drop the weapon, and as he went down on the ground, the weapon was what we would say was within arm's reach. We had 2 officers. One is your cover officer, the other is your control officer. As they approached, the cover officer noticed that the individual had a second gun in a holster on his hip. He yelled out to the control officer that there's a second weapon. The officer then disarmed the individual from the second weapon. As he was beginning to put the handcuffs on the individual reached into his small of his back. There was a third weapon there. Fortunately, the officer was able to control it very quickly, disarm him from the third weapon, effectively handcuff him, and stand him back up. At this time, the individual said that he had been shot in his leg. It was a wound to his left leg. We do not know if that shot was from an officer returning fire or if that shot happened to be self-inflicted during this gun battle. The point I want to make at this juncture is we had a scene that was unfolding very quickly. You've heard me talk many, many times, police work is not linear. Things don't happen in succession. They happen all at the same time. They're convoluted. We know we had an individual who had already shot someone. We know we had an individual who was armed. We know we had an individual who was exchanging gunfire with the police. When he got to that wooded area, that is where, in my estimation, and I really want this to go out to our entire public, that is where those officers showed extreme constraint, extreme control, discipline, and command and control at the scene. In essence, they saved the man's life. You know, the individual who was wounded, they saved his life by getting him to the proper rescue authorities very quickly. I think they might have saved his wife's life by getting her out of the area as quick as they did. We had other citizens who were coming home that night who were in the area while shots were being fired. And finally, they saved the individual's life by not using deadly force. And again, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. But when it does, we need to really celebrate the fact that these cops put themselves in harm's way for people that they've never met, they have no connection to, and will never see again. You know, it's very similar to the case that we had of the bank robbery on General Booth Boulevard. We know that numerous shots were fired at the police there. They were able to confront the individual who was firing at the officers. As he was reaching for a weapon, they were able to control him quick enough and disarm him fast enough. They did not have to use deadly force. So that's the fact pattern that we know it as of right now. And I think we just need to take a minute to reflect on the heroic efforts of those cops at the scene. 13, you're up.
Well, I mean, like you said, given the intense gun battle that lasted 20 minutes.
Yes, it did.
I mean, first of all, I mean, I've never been in a gun battle. I can't imagine what it's like to be an officer involved in that, and just how much restraint did they use to not use deadly force, like you said when he ran into the trees there.
We have to remember, you know, there's training, there's supervision, but eventually we revert back to survival tactics. I think those officers did a fantastic job in keeping everything in its proper place. And I think we have to also reflect for a moment that, thank goodness, the individual didn't go for that weapon quicker, because we might have a whole different outcome here.
And for my second question, this happened Friday night, but the press was not notified until 4:30 on Saturday. We're just wondering why the delay there?
We had a lot of things to sift through at that particular moment, and our main responsibility, our main focus was on the scene, Eric. We got it out as soon as we can. 10.
Chief, I'm not sure what that means by that. I mean, you have an incident in a very crowded apartment complex. I mean, shouldn't you put that out sooner? I mean, I realize you guys, on the front of investigation, there's a lot to go through at that point. But it's just a phone call to pick up the phone and call the media and say, hey, we got this incident. I'm not sure that answer.
Well, I think the answer is going to be this. Basically, the individual was in custody. There was no longer a public safety threat. We got the information out as soon as we could. That's when we put the information out. I'm here to tell you that 2 officers put their lives in jeopardy, and you're interested in how soon I can get the information to you. We did put it out as fast as we could. We could discuss that at maybe a different time.
I mean,
no, we're not going to continue the discussion as to when we put the information out.
I don't want to argue with you.
Well, you're not.
But from a standpoint, it just says then we're going to only put out information when we want to put it out, when it really suits us. If we're looking for someone, I still don't understand why it took so long.
Because we had a lot of things moving at that time. Officers worked all through the night. We had detectives working all through the night. And we wanted to put this investigation in its proper place, make sure individuals were taken to the hospital, were tended to before we put all the information out. Okay, Channel 3.
Can you give me any facts as to what happened with the initial call, where the strangulation charge came from? What happened before you guys got there from detectives and from family? We're hearing that there's some miscommunication as to what exactly happened before.
That is part of the investigation that's still unfolding, so I'd like to hold off on that right now. That's the piece of the investigation which will be taking place in its proper location, which is adjudicated in court.
Okay, also, family had mentioned that he was drunk at that point, doesn't quite remember what happened that night. What was he like when he was taken into custody afterwards? What was the suspect like?
Well, he did have a gun wound to his leg. We did get him the proper medical attention at that time. There is indications of high intoxication at that time.
Was he combative with you guys? I'm sorry. Was he combative with you guys once he was in custody?
I'm not going to say combative at that point. Prior to being in custody, he was highly combative. Yes, pilot.
Can we know the names of the two officers?
I'm not going to release that right now. That'll come out further, and here's the reason. When we have an officer-involved shooting, all officers are interviewed, and they have the right to have representation while they're being interviewed for a criminal case. So right now, we're going to keep the officers' names to us until such time as they've had proper administrative due process. Then I'll be more than happy. You will hear these officers' names again because we're going to recognize them.
And I have one more question. When the officers, you said that they did return fire. You also said that they did not use deadly force, that they didn't have to use deadly force. Is that?
Well, they did return fire as being fired upon. At the very end, when the individual was going for that third weapon, they could have used deadly force. They were able to mitigate that as quick as possible and able to neutralize it as quick as possible. So at that moment, they did not. Certainly firing the weapon back is a use of deadly force.
How many officers responded total? I mean, I would imagine after 20 minutes, it must have increased.
I do not have the exact number. Because we not only had the officers respond, we started rolling out like K-9 and SWAT teams, and then we started rolling out command supervision, because whenever we have an officer-involved shooting, we get all the command supervision out to make sure it's being done appropriately at that time.
I mean, Chief, the family's here right now. Are they going to be able to talk to you or ask you any questions?
We will have a sidebar conversation. I already did speak to the individual's father, and we'll have another conversation separately. One more from 10 since they got another shot.
How many officers are administrative leave right now?
They're not leave, they're on administrative assignment. We give them work to do. We have 5.
5 of them total?
Yes. Because at this time, until such time as the hospital can release the round to us, we don't know which officer's weapon was the one, if an officer's weapon was the one that caused that. Okay? Pilot, last question.
Can you go into any more detail? It sounds like you're saying that these officers, they did what they did, it went well, it was right. Can you go into any more detail about what they did that worked the way it was supposed to? Any more detail?
Well, they used what we call contact control. One officer is your control officer, the other one's your contact. They had good tactical positioning. They approached the right way. They did it quickly. And I think they were both officers were in sync with each other, and they gave the proper commands. And when the individual began to make a certain move, the one officer was able to quickly mitigate that. And that's what really wound up in a successful end to the arrest. And please, everyone has to remember, it doesn't always happen like this. Sometimes an individual who has a weapon points it the wrong way, and then officers have to use deadly force, which is acceptable by law, and I think it's acceptable morally. I think the officers did a fantastic job in this particular case. Okay? All right, thank you.